Okay, welcome, Dave. Thank you for joining us for Freedom Unleashed here in Perth, October 31st, and such a good gathering of wonderful souls here coming to unite in the name of freedom. We thank you for taking the time to join us. You joined us only a few weeks ago now, and again, you're giving us the time to share some things. We really appreciate that. This was an event that was put on in response to the announcements to try and soothe the population and the anxieties that might be forming there, and to really facilitate the healthy flow of that energy towards something positive. And there is no one that reframes things in a positive light as you do, Dave. So you're the perfect man to come and talk to us. How is everything?
Yeah, very well. Thanks for having me again.
It's a pleasure. So we had a few things that we wanted to touch on today, and I think we were going to start with looking at the public and private jurisdiction and things around that. This talk in particular, with Tom, we were looking at kind of holding on to what was and kind of fighting using honourable pathways to hold on to that. And this one here, we would like to really discuss and hopefully paint a bit of a picture for anyone in this room that is looking to leave a certain employment or industry, but wanting to offer that same service in a space that still allows them to be an educator or a carer or whatever it is. So that's the direction of the conversation. And if you want to start us off in that public-private realm, that'd be fantastic.
Sure. So the first thing to talk about really is to go back a little bit in history. So I might share screen, and because once we sort of were chatting the other day, I realized that maybe there's some things that aren't necessarily common with everyone. So I think it's important. Has that come up?
Yeah, that's clear.
So I think it's important for us to look in the past to work out why we're in this mess right now. And then once we know where we are, we can work out where we probably should be going. So I want to give that a bit of context first. So if most people don't know, but some of you may know this sort of information. So it's more filling in the gaps for those who aren't aware, and it may add a little bit more information for those who are aware of this. But back in 1666, there was a Black Plague, and there was the fires of London. And basically what happened is that the churches at that time were the ones who looked after the births, deaths and marriages. So all the registration was done through the churches. But as there were so many lives lost at that time, they lost count of who was alive and who wasn't. So the government came up with a solution, and it was called the Cestui Act 1666. So what the government did, which was very tricky, but you can read up on all of this, is basically they declared the following things. So the act debated was to segregate the rights of men and women, meaning all men and women were declared dead and lost at sea. So I'm just going to move that. So the State of London took custody of everybody and their property into a trust. The state became the trustee, holding all titles to the people and property until a living man comes back to reclaim those titles, and he can also claim damages. So what that meant was, effectively, they took ownership of everybody, and unless you came forward to say that you're alive, you were presumed dead and lost at sea. And this is important for where we are right now. So we've all been born into a deception, and the deception is based around the birth certificate, and it's based around what jurisdiction we've been placed in. So after the water breaks, you come down the birth canal and you were delivered by the doctor, usually into a ward or the state. Then given your birth certificate. Now, these are all maritime words. So when a ship comes down the canal, it's delivered into its berth and then it's docked. The cargo that is on board is given a bill of lading. A bill of lading and a birth certificate look very similar. We then do commerce using currency, current, and using our merchant facilities. These are all maritime words that you may not be aware of. So you are simply traded as cargo and you're considered dead, fictional, and lost at sea. You're operating in the law of the sea, which is admiralty law, and you are a debtor. This is important to understand where we are. So all this information relates to how the general public is still legally tied through maritime admiralty law. Through this ancient legal construct, we can be easily controlled and duped. Learning about your legal fiction helps you to unlock yourself. Otherwise, you are just an empty vessel floating on the sea of commerce. Parents are tricked into registering their birth of their babies. And this is effectively the birth certificate fraud that some people may be aware of. So when you have a look at a cargo manifest, I'm not sure if you can see this, but it's all capital letters. All the cargo is capital letters. Every license that you've got, your passport, Medicare card, your wedding certificate or marriage license, all of those things are all in capital letters. And this is your straw man. And this is the important thing to start to understand, is that the birth certificate makes you into the dead entity and they treat you as lost at sea. And you can operate in this. So this is just recapping for some people that may not be aware of this, but you are effectively considered cargo through your birth certificate. There's a correct way to write your name and there's an incorrect name to write your name. So once your birth certificate is created, you are then traded, and you were traded as effectively like a company or a piece of cargo. And you can actually look this up. You used to be able to look it up on a website called fidelity.com. And you could look up using your birth certificate or your passport and often your tax file number. And you could see how much your identity, your name in all caps, has been traded. And some people have posted this up on the internet, but it's millions and millions of dollars. 200 million, could be more. So everybody who has a birth certificate is tied to the United States, to Washington, DC, using this method. So the 1611 King James Bible is important, and it's important for a couple of reasons. But the 1611 King James Bible is what our laws are built upon, but it's also what these elites have sworn an oath to. So they are tied to the 1611 King James Bible. And so these elites have rules and they have oaths. However, they're allowed to deceive you. So I believe that there is a set of rules that they have to abide by to stay in charge, but they can deceive you. And being deceived is your fault because all of this information is out there now. So basically stop playing checkers because they're playing chess. So the board looks the same, but the game is completely different. And once you start understanding how to play this game, then we can start to win this game. And that's the important part. So there's two jurisdictions or two main jurisdictions. There's multiple levels of jurisdiction, but there's two main ones. One's public and one's private. Now, the public jurisdiction, you'll note that all the laws that are written will talk about persons, residents, citizens, trust, taxpayer, rates payer, driver, all of these things, but none of them will discuss you as a man or a woman. Okay, so that man or woman is a private jurisdiction. So the Reserve Bank notes, so the fiat system is a public system, but the gold, silver, gold coins is a private system. It's got actual value or actual substance. So your all caps name, your all caps name is the public system. And then when you use your name in style case, that's the private jurisdiction. So it's learning the difference between public and private. So in the public, you're obliged to pay tax, rates, fees, fines, penalties, registrations, permits, mortgages, all of those bills. Now, you're only in the private obligated to the creator. And the creator has different things depending on who you believe your creator is. But under the Bible, it says tithing is 10%. Okay, so the government assumes responsibility in the public system, where the people assume responsibility in the private system. In the public system, you're a slave. In the private system, you're free. And then in the public system, you've got a birth certificate. In the private system, you've got a live birth certificate, or what used to happen is that you just have your name put down into the family Bible and it was recorded with the church. So when you look at this public and private, the wording matters, and one can't mingle with the other. So if you're in a private jurisdiction, you can't then start using the public. That's called commingling. So when you commingle, you get pulled back into the public. And there's all these little traps along the way to pull you back into there. So what you've got to start realizing is who you are, which is a man or a woman, and you're real. You're not dead, you're not lost at sea. And so you need to start acting in that capacity. But that doesn't mean that we don't have to act in our public status. So we need to know how to do both. So the hierarchy of authority, and we touched on the Bible before, but the hierarchy of authority, according to the Bible, which is what our laws have come from, so it doesn't matter on your beliefs, but effectively our laws come from this. So the Creator, or God, created man and woman. Man and woman created government, and then government created corporations, entities, persons, and all of those dead, lost at sea cargo that's underneath. So when you operate as the public, as the dead, lost at sea, birth certificate person, you are actually operating underneath the government. And this is why the government has control. When you start operating as a man and a woman, that's above the government. And as you know, that the government should actually be operating and run by the people. However, that's not how it is. So when you start looking at the private jurisdiction, what you want to do is understand the difference between things like common law and law of the land and maritime law. Okay, so when we're building, so the analogy I like to use is a castle, and we want to build strong foundations in the castle, and we want to build protection around our castle. Now, our castle can be all of our assets, everything that we care about, we want to protect inside this castle. So we want to make sure the walls are strong. We want to do all of those things. So when we start looking at protecting our assets, we want to look at things like private trusts or private foundations, or there's other things called unincorporated associations and unincorporated trusts. So it's effectively the same as what you would know as a normal trust or a foundation. However, it's not registered. It's not registered with the government because it's a private one. Okay, so there's a way to do both, and one they can't take from the other. So this is how they protect things. Now, one interesting thing to understand is that the Crown is an unincorporated trust. Well, sorry, I think it's unincorporated association. So the Crown is in the private. So just so you understand that these guys know how to use this stuff, they just don't like you knowing how to use it. So obviously we still need to do trade. So we still need to go out into the law of the sea, and we still need to be able to do that. but we want to protect ourselves from the pirates. The pirates are usually the government, the police, whatever agencies trying to take money off you with taxes, fines, registrations, rates, fees, etc. So what you want to do is make sure that those assets or your gold and silver or whatever it is that you've got is protected from the pirates from coming to get it. And you want to make sure that that's back in your castle, protected underneath a private trust or a private foundation, so that when you're going out to do commerce, you're aware of what position you're in and you're able to protect your assets. So now that we've sort of recapped on the basics of understanding the straw man, all of those things, we want to understand where we're going. So a lot of people look at the Bible and there's things in the Bible and that they'll take out of it. Everyone's got a different opinion. But in Revelation 18, it's basically the fall of Babylon, which I think most people believe that that's coming up and we're getting close to that. So let's have a look at what it says in Revelation 18. So come out of her, my people, so that you will not share in her sins, so that you will not receive any of her plagues. So come out of her. So this is how I take it. Come out of her is to come out of the Babylon system, to step away from that system. And you'll see that they start talking about merchants, and they'll talk about all of that in here. So the merchants of the earth will weep and mourn over her because no one buys their cargoes anymore. Okay, so remember your cargo. You're into the, you've been traded as all the merchants, those who have made a lot of money in this world. They will be in a position coming soon that they will no longer have anything to trade. All right, and it goes specifically into cargoes of gold, silver, etc., etc. But every sea captain and all who travel by ship, the sailors and all who earn their living from the sea will stand far off. Now that makes sense when you start understanding that we're all in this maritime law. So every sea captain and all who travel by ship. So in 1 hour, she has been brought to ruin. So in 1 hour, 1 hour is not an actual hour, but it's saying in a short period of time, the whole thing is brought down. So your merchants were the world's most important people. By your magic spell, all the nations were led astray. Okay, so what we're saying there is that the magic spell of what's been going on have been led astray. That's what's happening right now. This is the whole birth certificate fraud, all of those things, understanding who you are so that we can start working out where we're going from there. So I believe it's time to leave the Babylon system, and the Babylon system is that public system. And there's certain ways that you can move across into the private, and we can all start operating into the private. And we need to reclaim your inherent rights. So what do we have to do? So one, we have to know who you are. So you're a man, you're a woman, you're not a person, you're not an entity, you're not any of these other words that the government wants to put onto you. So know how to protect your assets. So if you've got houses, you've got any other assets, cars, etc., you can put them into trust, is probably best, a private trust, so that you're protecting that. That can get passed on to your family, and you don't have to pay taxes, and you don't have to do a whole range of different things on that. So you also want to know how to do trade without the pirates taking your gold. So you can do a lot of trade using things called private foundations. You end up with a bank account in any of the major banks will do it. But there's a way to set it up into the private so that you don't have to pay tax. You want to learn how to operate in the private whenever possible. So understanding the difference between public, private, this all takes knowledge and research, but there's a lot of information out there for you to have a look at now. And you want to get out of the Babylon system, which is the debt system. So everything's based on debt. Everyone's concerned about their ability to lend more money and get themselves into more debt, where I believe that we should be getting rid of our debt. And if we can't afford it, we can't afford it. We need to find ways in which we stop being a slave and start operating as the creditor, which is effectively going into the private, which is the honourable thing. If you can't afford something, you probably shouldn't be taking lots of money from other people or the banks or anything and being put into a slave position. And so you want to educate yourself, as the ignorance is now your fault, right? So once you understand this stuff, you need to start educating yourself and getting to understand exactly where you are in that system, and then start putting little things in place. So start moving towards that system, knowing that ultimately the Bible is telling us to go that direction, or saying to get out of that system. So we've got an understanding that potentially they're going to lose their money, and this other world is going to be more protected once we start knowing how to operate in that. And what I love about this picture is effectively all these elites playing up on their little games up on top. And if everyone just stood up, their game would be over. So I think it's a great picture for that. So that sort of takes us to the recap of that information. So should we start with some questions on that?
Yes, that would be good. Just want to point out that image many of us have probably seen over the years, and it's the context of how we process the message in that image. To stand up, in terms of what's said, often encouraged just to stand up and tell them we've had enough, that the game's over. It's actually an act of belligerence. And so what we're talking about here is standing up. It's standing up in an honourable way, and one that is actually navigating the system so that we can come into a space where we are more free. And there is a difference there. I just think that's important to keep in mind, because it's not, unless we address this issue here of jurisdiction and the games that they've set up, unless we address that, then there's only so far that all the services and all the alternative things we set up and all the network of different autonomous communities, all of that can only get us so far. The jurisdiction, I think, has to be dealt with at some point, and that's what we're talking about now, which is really good. I'm wondering whether we can use, so we've thrown around a few terms there: private trusts, unincorporated associations, private foundations. Maybe would we be able to use a real world example of something that you're working on, or people that you know are working on, and why they've used certain things to hold their services or assets?
Yeah, so most people are probably familiar with trusts, in the fact that trusts are set up, and anyone that's been in business, often the accountant will tell you to set up a trust and to put that in between your business and yourself, to give yourself some level of protection. So it's harder to crack a trust and take money from a trust. But a private trust is a whole nother level. Okay, so most people probably understand that it's effectively an entity that's set up, and you can have different people can be creditors in it, or they can be set up to be beneficiaries in it. So it depends on how you set up your trust. But effectively, if you set up a private trust and you set it up well, there's no way that it's drawing an income, for one, and there's no ownership, for two. So with there being no ownership and there's no income, it's basically impossible for them to go after. And so some people might debate that. Most of the people that I know that have been operating this stuff, they can't crack it. So the government has no ability to go in, because they don't have the jurisdiction to do so. So it's only usually if you do something wrong and you pull yourself back into their public jurisdiction that they can go into that. But a real world option is that basically when you set this up, you can go into the bank, you can get set up into your ability to do trade through all of this. You get a credit card, same as everything else. It just looks like a company credit card. But the government is not allowed to go into your account, and they're not allowed to access any of that information, and it's set up in the private. So it's not registered for GST, it's not registered for any of those things. So you don't have to go through that process. A foundation is very similar, and a foundation is done in a way that the entities and structure is different. So usually a foundation would be used for a small business option. So if you were running a small business sort of option, you get a private foundation, and it's more everyday sort of transactions, where a trust often holds assets. But in saying that, they can both do the same thing. The foundation can also hold an asset, and a trust can also do business. But it just seems to be the way that we understand it is that the trust is used more so for assets, and the foundation is used for more everyday business. So there are companies now or entities in the United States that are using these unincorporated associations and trusts, and they have been doing it for many years. And there's aspects of protection that the government's left in there for them. And then you can set up what's called a private membership association in the United States. And that's also registered on the UCC. So I think it's UCC 9 that you have the ability to do that. But there are restrictions on understanding on what you can do in the private and the public. So a big aspect of business is advertising. So advertising puts us into a public domain. So we can't advertise as we would usually. So you can't go out there, and say this sort of stuff and put ads out and do all of that sort of stuff. That's a public realm. There is ways in which you can do it, and you can tie one to the other. It's a little bit more complicated, but you would effectively probably be paying tax on the one that's visible, and then you'd be moving a lot of the assets or a lot of the income across to the other one, even though we're not meant to be saying it's income. So effectively, there are ways to do those things, but understanding that it's very similar to wearing a different hat, right? So you as a man or a woman have the ability to operate in both jurisdictions. And very similar to, say, a minister for health. Okay, a minister for health puts on a hat over there, and then they might be a senator over there. That's a different hat. And then they go home and they're a mum and a dad. That's a different hat again. So these are different jobs, and we have to start understanding what you can and can't do in each one, if that makes sense. And so a lot of this is just education. It's about understanding who we are and what we can and can't do in each thing. But effectively, you can set up these bank accounts, you can operate in that capacity, but it goes a whole lot further. And some people will hand back their licenses, they'll hand back any of the benefits that they get from the public system, and they go down that track. I personally haven't gone down that track. It seems to be a complicated journey. But I have done things like accessing that trust. So that trust that the government set up for us off our birth certificate, there is a way that you can access that, and you can pay off some of your debts. It's a little bit more complicated to do, but it's called a promissory note, and you can pay off bank debts, credit cards, those sorts of things by accessing this account, and you can dissolve that debt or discharge that liability by using things like that. So there are things that you can do when you start to learn this stuff, but when you go into the real complicated stuff like paying off your mortgage, those sorts of things, if you start to get too far, you'll probably have some people knocking on your door, as they don't really want you understanding this stuff.
Yeah, and maybe we can bring it back to, say, this whole event actually started in a conversation knowing that there were some teachers that we knew at a Steiner school, and they were very upset by the announcement of mandates. They knew that they weren't going to get the jab, and so were looking at stepping away from their job when the time comes. And I thought, well, why not bring them together and have a discussion to say maybe there's another space, maybe there's homeschool and co-ops, a service that can be offered, in an unincorporated association or whatever those things are. So that's kind of what gave birth to today. So can we speak to that? Are you aware of any groups, or are you involved with any groups that have structured things in a particular way to offer a particular service, just so that the audience here can say, oh, okay, there were a group of so-and-so and they used to be attached to the state and within that public system, and now they're going about offering their sacred gift in a different manner, in a different space, protected.
Yeah, well, a good example of what's everyone's probably seen operating is an RSL. It's a private association or a private membership association. You can't access an RSL unless you sign in as a member at the door, right? So they're able to actually get into that level of jurisdiction. Now, I think they're probably playing both sides in a capacity. There's probably tax things that they're doing and everything, but that's an example of a private membership association in there. And there are some other clubs and that sort of thing that do that puts them into a private jurisdiction. So when we're talking about teaching or we're talking about health, any of those things, if we have full disclosure with the other individual that we're in this jurisdiction and that we agree to these rules together, we're now in a private jurisdiction, right? So we can put that into a private, and as long as they're informed. So what you've got to think about is a little bit of a barrier all the way around you. So every way in which communication occurs, they need to be fully aware that they're in that private jurisdiction. And if you can prove that, then it falls outside of the area that the courts can go to. But on your website, you'd want to have a little message that says, this is a private membership association, blah, 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 blah. You'll see it on the Hilme website. If you have a communication out, video, any of those things, then you want to put that in front of the video. A phone call in, you want to make sure that they're aware. So basically think of every capacity, the message on your phone, these people that are in the United States, they'll do that sort of thing. So thanks for calling a private membership association. Please understand that this is private jurisdiction, da, 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 da. And you just say this little spiel beforehand so that everyone's aware. And what you do is set up non-disclosure agreements. So a non-disclosure agreement means that the party can't talk about it publicly. So you set up a non-disclosure agreement as they come in, they sign the non-disclosure agreement, and everyone's in that private jurisdiction. And it puts us into also the equity side of things as well. And if anyone studied the law, then equity prevails. So it supersedes or goes over the top of state and federal law. And it's only when you break the law with something that's significant, i.e. that there's an injured party, that then you're brought back into the public system, because there's no protection for those sorts of things. And so, when we're looking at it before, there's 7 million odd statutes, acts, and laws. And then on the other side, into the private, is basically the 10 commandments. And that's where those laws have come from, or people call them natural law or whatever. So basically don't hurt someone, and you're okay, and you're not back in that jurisdiction. So full disclosure is required to both parties that you're entering into this agreement. And then you basically set up that agreement. And what you do inside that, you can advertise, you can do whatever you want to do. So what we really need to do is start doing trade inside of these private membership associations or these umbrella associations, so that we can work out who's got those skills and start trading with each other. And it's outside of the government's reach, and everyone's aware of the group that they're in, and they're able to do that. So this is a lot of the information I've been working on in the last 6 months, is to try to bring some of the world's experts into this so that we can start teaching this, so that everyone can start operating in this manner. And that's the big aspect, is that the sooner we work out how to operate and do this stuff, the better. And I'm not saying that I've got all the answers. There's certainly people that know a whole lot more than me. But I do believe that that's the direction that we're meant to go. I do believe we're meant to pull away from the government and those entities, and we're meant to be starting to work together in a private capacity and start coming up with solutions. And so that's obviously backed up with the biblical stuff that I brought up. But the more that I've traveled in this direction, the more I feel that that's the right way as well, and that's where naturally people are going. So I saw a airline company that came out for the unvaccinated the other day. I think it's called Freedom Air or something like that. So they're trying to get going. And so what I think is that there's going to be a divide. Already there's a divide between vax and unvaxxed, but there's going to be a divide anyway. But I don't think we should be divided as the people, but I do think we should divide ourselves off and start working with those that are like-minded and are in that sort of jurisdiction, so that we can be protected. We can set up these umbrella associations, and then we can inspire others to come across. So that's why I say I don't want to be divided with those and create that division, because I think that that's leading into their game. But I do think that we need to start operating in that capacity. So that's why we started Heal Me, was effectively that, well, basically it came from my journey originally, but Heal Me's direction has basically been, since COVID, is helping those health practitioners come across and move across into a private jurisdiction, and to be able to operate and offer services to those that are in that private membership association, so that they can still access the services that they're used to. And there's certain words that we can't use. So under the APRA Act, they've got what they call, protected names. So there's a list, and you can look on their website, but it says protected names, and things like chiropractor, physiotherapist, those sorts of things are protected names. So that would be an idea of what the public is. But if you were to be in the private and you called yourself an integrative consultant that previously trained as a chiropractor, for example, that would be factually correct. Everyone would know what you're talking about, but it's also wink, wink, not in the jurisdiction of APRA or the government to come after. So we can be truthful, which is completely truthful. That's what you're trained at. You hand in your APRA registration, which is your public thing pulling you across, and you operate in the private. Now, provided that we can get enough people across to all of these networks, we can continue to do trade and support these people. And I see it as an opportunity for these people. Is that if you look previously, you were probably just one looking at the immediate area around you. If you're a chiro or a physio or whatever, you're looking at that little area. Even a teacher, you're still looking at a small area. But when we're looking at online, we can expand that much further out. And also you're competing against all these other groups, but now there's not so much competition. So now you've got the opportunity to really shine. So I would suggest to all of these businesses is that we need to start changing our perspective as to see this as an opportunity to create a new world, to create something that's positive, to be around people that are understanding of where the world's at, and be excited about that rather than be concerned and in fear and not knowing what the government's going to do next and living in that space. I think that that's a very bad space to be in, and allowing someone, whether it be one person up the top, dictating to you whether you should open or you can't open, or if you open that you need to only have this many people in and you have to wear a mask and they have to be double vaxxed and all this sort of stuff. In a private jurisdiction, it's your place, it's your rights, and you can do what you like. And so I think that this is something that people need to explore further. They need to feel comfortable with this and start to delve into this. All this information that I'm providing is out there. It's available for people to start to look at. And we're bringing on more and more people onto the Heal Me platform to try to help support that aspect in helping these small businesses come across. And that's exactly what we're talking about in the teaching side. I think it may even be easier in the teaching side, is that you've already got homeschooling and you've already got distance education programs that we can replicate. So there's already that sort of setup, where in the medical system, you can't really operate in the private, up until now, is coming up with this sort of stuff. So the medical system, I think if we can crack that, that's the big thing. I've been told that this exists in the United States, where there's a completely private emergency room, which is, if you think about liability, think about all of those things, that's, if they can do that, then that's probably the largest sort of risk side of things. So I think that teaching will be quite easy to move across to. I think it's, online resources. With the teaching side of things, you've got also a curriculum that I think most parents would want to attach to, which allows them still to keep the doors open to university and everything else. So if you ticked those boxes of that curriculum, and then you start adding on amazing things, because if you look back at your education, there's a lot of stuff that's irrelevant, a lot of stuff that doesn't offer any
Lots of laughs in the crowd.
What's that?
Lots of laughs. That drew lots of laughs in the crowd, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's irrelevant, most of the stuff. I mean, the advanced mathematics and all of this sort of stuff, I've never used in my life. And I've run some pretty big businesses and companies and that sort of stuff, and nothing that a calculator wasn't able to work out. So there's a lot of stuff I think that we don't need to go into, but there's a lot of really cool stuff that I think that we could set our kids up with that would give them such an ability to get ahead of the curve. If we were able to, even teaching them the Constitution, for example, or teaching them the legal stuff, or teaching them coding, or any of these things that aren't really done, I think that that's the exciting part, is that, yes, we want to tick the box that we've got that base curriculum so that it leaves their options open. I think that that's a smart idea. But I do think that there's so many exciting subjects that we can open up that we haven't even thought of. And that's where we're going to give the most benefit to our kids moving forward, is to start bringing in different interesting people. And I've seen some co-ops done overseas. In fact, Mary, who I work with at Empower, she's involved in a co-op. And what they do is every Friday they get together as a group, so from all over, and then they have 4 subjects in that day. So they hire out a hall, and there's 4 subjects of that day in which the kids pick. And I think they do a semester, the same sort of thing. And the parents are actually the ones who are running these classes. So their specialty in art or this or whatever. And so they come together, they get that social aspect, do these extra classes, and then they're still doing their distance education or whatever, or homeschooling the rest of the time. But I think that that's the sort of stuff, is that we want to commingle that sort of environment between, I think that's probably the biggest thing that I've been concerned about if I look at homeschooling, is that aspect of, or thought that they're going to become socially awkward as children. So I do believe that we need to make sure that there's plenty of time still to do those sorts of things, and whether they join other classes and sports and all of those sorts of stuff.
And also keeping in mind that there's going to be an enormous increase in the numbers of, every homeschooling children I know are amazing. So there's no social awkwardness there, but the numbers are only going to grow. And the time that I've spent down in the Southwest, that's something that comes up over and over, that parents are really looking in that direction, and they want to be, well, they already are involved in child's education, which seems like a totally natural way for it to be done. But they're looking to really establish solid homeschooling co-ops, and it's that jurisdictional trick that I think is critical there. I'm wondering, I don't know if you want to mention the platform that you might be helping to get up and running around this teaching concept, but it would be good to hear how they structured things. Are they, what type of entities did they create for different aspects, whether it's their services itself or assets held?
Yeah, so they're looking at following the same sort of model as Heal Me. They want to call it Teach Me, actually. And then they've come to me asking for my assistance on how to set it up. Most of the people are based with a knowledge in common law. So it's a common law group that's the basis of who's setting up this particular one I'm talking about. So they will base it on those sorts of things. And I think what we would do is provide every teacher with a private foundation as part of it. So an average income for a teacher is about 70,000. If you were to not pay tax on that, you're at about 50. Oh, by the time you minus tax, you're at about 55,000. So 55,000. We did some figures on what you'd have to do to try to make that sort of income for the teachers. And that's going to be the tricky thing, is making sure that we've got enough students for each class. But about 2,500 is what I came up with, is the figure per annum to teach a child and have those things and have some interesting classes and all of that sort of stuff. And that's sort of what we're looking at as a model at the moment, and whether that would work, because you've got to make sure that, one, the teachers got enough income to continue their life, and maybe they can come down a little bit. Maybe in this new world, we don't have to have $50,000 incomes tax-free, but we'll have to work that out. And then the parents have got to work out if they can afford like a $2,500 a year investment into their kids. So that's where we're looking at the moment, is trying to work out what that model would work for everyone. And yeah, they'll run it under it's effectively a group unincorporated trust is what the title would be. And that would allow the teachers to be able to operate with protection underneath, but also by setting them up a private foundation where they've got a bank account and everything, it makes it easy for us to move money across. Because the banking is really the key to all of this, is how to operate in this system. It gets pulled back into the banking system. And so we have to just be careful with how we use the accounts and how we do things. So there's some rules in using these foundations and trusts, is that you don't want to be putting all your smokes on there and your alcohol and then going to the shops and doing all of that, because that clearly looks like it's being used in the wrong capacity. If you wanted to use that account, you can take it out in cash and you can buy whatever you want. Or you can move it to another everyday saver account and you can spend it however you like. But you want to make sure that you're not having flags on the banking system, that you're using the accounts in a way that wasn't set up for. So that's the main thing with how to run your accounts. And you have a Westpac card, you have, I was just looking for mine, but yeah, you've got a card, you operate exactly the same as what you would otherwise.
Yeah, that's so good to hear of a real world example there, the way that Heal Me has been set up and Teach Me looking to get set up. I guess I just wanted to mention there that, the direction that many of us want to head in, as we move away from a paradigm around money and scarcity, and we move into collaboration and cooperation, transcending that competition mindset, that there is abundance in that with the actual human energy that exists within each of us. And when we start to come together and offer our services, we don't have to worry about food on the table, because someone will be growing it and that'll be offering, and it's all sharing and synergistically nurturing everyone that's involved. But there is a bridge, and some people want to still exist in that other one, and it sounds like that's can be navigated in the way that you've just said there.
Yeah, I do think that barter and cryptocurrency will come together as well as a way to do trade. So I do think that will be one of the big steps, and hopefully we don't really have to be putting $2,500 here. It can be trade across here, and we're all collaborating in some way. But we've got to try to come up with fair systems that everyone feels comfortable with. So yeah, it's an interesting time. I think it's a very exciting time, and I think that I had a guy that used to work for me he called me up and he was just about to lose his job. And so I think his last day was actually this week. So the place that he's training at is saying that they need vaccine status in Melbourne. So he probably won't be able to work there any further. And he rang me and was all upset and all that sort of thing. And then we just chatted and I said, look, this is a big opportunity. You know, how many people have put themselves out there as a personal trainer to say, I'm open to everyone, vaxxed or unvaxxed. I'm willing to do this, blah, 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 and put it out there. Use it as an investment. You know, like this is an opportunity to stand apart from the rest of the crowd. And once we started talking about what he can do and how he can do things, all it was perspective. And this is what most of it is for most people, is that from that early fear or the frustrations and all of those things, when we start looking at the opportunities, we can start changing our perspective. And when we change our perspective, everything becomes different. You know, I'm quite excited about the world. I talk to a lot of people and they're in fear. Now, I can understand why they're in fear. I'm not disputing that aspect, but if you're in fear, you're not going to be able to create. You're not going to be able to be there properly for your kids and to do all of those things. You're constantly in that part and no one listens to you when you're in fear. You know, it's not inspiring for anyone else. So it's really important that the journey starts inward, is that you've got to work out who you are first, what you stand for, and how you're going to get to that place where you can start working without that fear. And part of that can probably be switch off some of that social media, switch off that. You know, it doesn't really change when it's a little bit worse. It doesn't really change anything else to know that it's that extra bit worse. You know, like ultimately, it's terrible what's going on. But it doesn't really change anything, right? Is that, okay, you watch something else, another video, and wow, there's this strange thing as well. And it's just depressing. So, you know, like, let's get out of that shit and start working towards something a bit more exciting, start creating the world we want to see for our kids. And that's where I think that, you know, we can start creating that. If we're out of that fearful state, we can start to get in that creative state. And just, we don't need them. We don't need the government. We don't need all of what they're doing. We just need to be pulling everyone across and doing some exciting stuff and creating the world that we all want to see.
Yes, bravo, Dave. Well said. So I just want to mention the Heal Me platform that you've put together for anyone that is interested in that. There's a little free trial that you can sign up to. You can explore in there. It's got, like Dave was saying, through the in-private medical guild, there's integrative consultants, you word it as, that are signing up there and building that database. There's specific groups on everything from holistic dentistry through to, you know, the vaccine stuff, and also the lawful element. We've touched on it today, and I know that there's some introductory knowledge courses that deal specifically with that private public that you've just mentioned. There's also another course on trust, I think it is, understanding trust, and there's going to be a lot more like that offered from yourself and Tom. So it does seem like a great place to start. There's probably some really advanced people in here, I know there are, and you know, I should have said at the start that everything that we share today is, it's just a taster, and it shouldn't be taken as the bottom line or the final word. It's really something that has to be explored. It's an extremely complex field, and it is one that deserves our time if we do want to look in that direction of moving forward together into the private. But definitely take on board what was said today, but also take responsibility for any future actions, and know that it's going to take ongoing, persistent effort to pursue that knowledge and continue to empower yourselves.
Yeah, and just vote on your feet, guys. If a shop says that they're not going to let you in because you're not vaccinated, well, find another shop. Do you know what I mean? Like, support the people that are not taking that. You know, I just think that it's crazy that we get upset that, you know, that we're not being allowed in. It's easy for me. I just want to support those people that are doing the right thing. So, look up, there's a couple of really good websites now or on social media that are those ones that are doing that are vax or unvaxxed and those sorts of things. Jump on that, go and support them. Like, let's vote with our feet, move away from those other companies, and we'll create our own little world. And I'm sure our world will be a much happier place than their world.
Yes, absolutely. All righty, thank you, Dave. Much appreciated. Another very uplifting and expansive conversation, and a good reminder that it's important to surround ourselves with these types of conversations, because there is some pretty heavy vortexes out there that aren't necessarily going to get us to where we want to get to. So thank you for coming and imparting that wisdom again, and letting that hopefully permeate out through each of us that attended today.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
No worries, Dave. Thank you. See ya.
Cheers, guys.
Take time now and think about what you got. Look inside, draw the surface curtain. You can be certain, my friends, we got a lot. And everyone's got their own stories of sorrows and glories. We can laugh and we can cry. We play out these lives, and one day this body will die. And I may never know exactly what you go through. I may never know just exactly what you go through. But there's one thing I'll always share with you. I'll share with you. I'll share with you, yes. You are always loved. You are always loved. Child, you will always be loved. Always loved. Always loved. When you feel lost and can't find your way, when it gets dark at the end of the day, try to remember that it's just a part of it all. There is a light inside of your heart, and it penetrates through all that you are. Love penetrates through all that you are. Love is all you are. And I may never know exactly what you go through. I may never know just exactly what you go through. But there's one thing I'll always share with you. I'll share with you. I'll share with you, yes. You are always loved. You are always loved. Child, you will always be loved. Always loved. Always loved. The true mystery is in everything, and time doesn't really mean anything. Infinitely is how we sing again. The true mystery is in everything, and time doesn't really mean anything. From love we sing, from love